Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this very special edition of the Industry 4.0 Club's Fireside Chat. I'm Grace Donovan and joined today by Mike Ungar and Mike Yost, who are my fellow co-founders of the Industry 4.0 Club. And we're so excited today to have our featured guest, Katherine Calahane, joining us today. As a quick introduction, the Industry 4.0 Club, in all of our different rooms, we host weekly conversations on topics around Industry 4.0 that focus on tech, manufacturing, and digital transformation. Our goal is to lead engaging and holistic conversations that highlight unique perspectives, achievements, and challenges of people in the industry. For women in manufacturing, that's specifically focusing on the roles of women in this industry. And Fireside Chat, we really want to highlight individuals' unique experiences. So today we're doing a bit of a combination room since we were all really excited to speak with Kathy. So I will pass the mic over to Mike Ungar specifically. I know we got two of you in here today. Mike, why don't you give us a quick introduction and then we'll kind of go through our hosts and then speak to Kathy.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. Hi, I'm Mike Ungar. I am also an Industry 4.0 co-founder, as Grace mentioned. When I'm not doing this, I'm a business coach and executive coach. Having spent 35 years with Michelin and doing the coaching business the last couple of years. Really anxious to talk with Kathy today. So let me pass it to Mike to introduce himself and introduce Kathy.
Perfect. Thank you both. And thanks, Kathy, for being here. As the others have mentioned, my name is Mike Yost. I'm one of the co-founders of the Industry 4.0 Club. I've had the good fortune of helping to found two things in my life that I continue to pour my efforts into, one being the Industry 4.0 Club and the other being a startup company called Bennett, in which Kathy is the CEO and my business partner on that front. So I get to work with Kathy regularly. I get to see who she is, what she's all about. And I am super excited that she's here to share her story with us. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself quickly and we'll start talking about who Kathy is and what makes her tick. So Kathy, welcome.
All right. Sorry. Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you, Grace and Mike and Mike. So I'm Kathy Calahane. I live in Ohio. I come from manufacturing, so I'll start right back then. My grandparents were manufacturers. My parents were manufacturers. Myself, my husband, manufacturers, as well as my oldest son. And just to put it in a little diagram, when I sort of extrapolated it out, it was pretty incredible to actually see how much influence manufacturing has had throughout my entire life. And that's part of what the passion and drive for me is in wanting to help manufacturers. So stepping back a little bit, from my manufacturing experience, I joined Goodyear at their flagship facility in Napanee, Ontario back in '92, and I was there for 8 years. I spent 5 years on the front lines. I like to say I threw tires around. So I physically handled tires through inspection and offloading. We did the testing on the materials on the tires after they were cured, did the balance and everything else. After 5 years on the floor, I moved into the office where I helped with the management and the running from the tire manufacturing component of the plant from when tires were built till they went out the door. After that, I took a break and I went back into academia where I completed a technical degree in architecture. I then went on to finish an undergrad as well as a master's in architecture. Pivot forward a little bit in 2017, actually let's step back one more year. 2016, BennitAI, as Mike was just talking about, was founded at my kitchen table here in Ohio. There was myself, my husband Ryan, and Mike, and we were just talking about what was it that we felt collaboratively we could do to help manufacturing in our area because it was such a driving force in our lives. At that point, I was more the test person. We were building stuff. They'd throw it over. Would you use this as a person on the floor? Would you have used it in the office? And I'd give my feedback. Go forward another year in 2017, we had a family event. Ryan, my husband, had a stroke at 46. And at the time, Mike was driving Bennett alone because I was doing some architecture. I was helping take care of my husband, and Ryan was recovering. At that point, I felt we had an investor that, it was a responsibility that I wanted to take on to come back in full time into Bennett. So since 2017, I have been helping Mike lead the front with what we're doing at Bennett. I'll jump into Bennett for a quick minute so we can get on to the actual real conversations. On top of everything that I'm doing, what I've just explained and what we're doing at Bennett, I also sit as an executive member of the committee of the board of directors for CESMII. So for those of you who don't know who CESMII is the U.S. National Institute on Smart Manufacturing. So all this for me brings that passion of improving lives for manufacturing workers and those that support that environment. So Bennett, what we're doing is we're all about helping manufacturers solve problems by connecting people. So we like to guide ourselves by our values, and our values start with selflessness, that we're here to serve, put everyone else ahead of us. We have an uncomfortable openness we like to talk about, which is we need to have these conversations, and it needs to start with us being open, sharing what are the problems, how do we connect people, where do you find them, and just how do we bring those communities together. We also are about continuous learning. So we're here building a product and communities, not for us, but it's for manufacturers and their constituents. And we're very happy to be leading that charge and helping wherever we can. So that's a little bit about me and my journey.
I just want to know, Mike, since Kathy's manufacturing background comes from Goodyear, and you had spent 35 years at Michelin, whether you two are actually allowed to talk, or if you have any zingers that you want to throw at her.
Oh, no. The only thing I would say, Kathy, just so you know, is when we get our results at Michelin, we never can say we had a good year. We have to say it was a great year. Although, because if we said it was good year, then we would be promoting somebody else's brand.
Absolutely.
Mike, I think that's the best joke I've ever heard you tell.
Yeah,
I know.
okay.
I got that one down, but I'm glad this is being recorded. So
anyway,
I can
but
share.
Thank you. Grace?
I was just going to ask if Goodyear ever had a similar kind of thing. You could never say you had a bad year because then you'd be changing the name of the company.
Not necessarily. But while we're on Goodyear, let me use this as a bit of an opportunity to sort of jump in. I know I was asked sort of what are a couple of topics that sort of are important to me, dear to my heart, whatever it is that I want to drive forward. And, women in manufacturing, when I was in the factory, there was some that looked like me, not as many. I worked in a part of the plant that there was 11 of us. 4 were women. 1 did leave during my tenure while I was still on the floor. All my supervisors, all my immediate bosses, they were all males. When I went into the office, obviously there were some more women. I'm happy to say that I still have connections to that facility, and the sort of equality, it's bouncing a little bit more, but it's certainly viewed, and in my opinion, as a more sort of male role on that factory floor part. So I really would challenge anybody that's out there listening, and women, that there's a role for us all to play. And it provided a great opportunity for me. It's led me in part to how I get to be here to talk to everybody about what drives me with manufacturing. Yeah. So it was a great stepping stone for that.
Kathy, how do we make the shop floor that you had worked in and others like it more attractive for women to choose to work in that particular area?
That's a really good question. So when we were starting, and I don't want to bring everything back to Bennett, but obviously that's sort of how we brought the conversation forward with us in our kitchen table. Part of it for me, what resonated, and I won't deny it, was the salary. It was a great salary to be able to leave what I was doing, which was in design, go into manufacturing. One of the key things that, and Mike, I just mentioned to this before we started the conversation talking about our competitive workforce, was I had the luxury of being in a facility that was the flagship facility. So the technology there was incredible. It was state of the art. It was very secure. Couldn't share an awful lot. What resonated there with me also is because that new technology was there, there was a drive because, you know, I'm an educated person. I love to learn. So if there's new technology, well, what is it and how is it applicable to what we're doing in manufacturing? So that to me was one key part. In how we expand and get people interested, you know, it's using the facilities that are available to us. Educational institutions, I know my alma maters, both St. Clair College in Windsor, Ontario, and LTU in Southfield, Michigan. There's a lot more programs that are engaging and trying to bring more equality into the field. And those are just some of the easy touching points. I think we have other facilities and institutes like Manufacturing Works here in Ohio that is focused on getting right on the factory floor and how can they have impact. And I think that type of knowledge and information that's out there, and the more that people are aware of that, I think that's a key part, is how do we get the information to the people and learn. But it does start early in school. People need to get past the, you know, if it's technology, you know, is there a barrier there? If it's, let's compare college to university, what's the barrier that's there mentally that people feel, oh, I'm set to go to university? Well, my first degree was at a college. It was a technical degree. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I've always said, Mike, you know, you'll be familiar with this, is to me, that degree was probably bigger than my undergrad and my master's, because I learned the skill set that I needed to do what I was doing. So I think we need to get past the stigma of what does it mean to be in manufacturing, because it's not the manufacturing of my parents or my grandparents.
So, you know, if I can, just to follow on from that. So you've highlighted the education piece and the awareness of what the salary, those sort of things. My experience is one of the barriers, perceived or real, if you will, at least in my experience, really are more around infrastructure. Things like the weight, the ergonomics involved on the shop floor, particularly in our industry of tires. Mm-hmm. And secondly, because I think at least the plants that I've been involved in work 24/7, the availability of daycare. So those were two things I thought infrastructure-wise that seemed to also hold back a lot of women from wanting to come into the workforce. What do you think about that compared to the education piece?
Those are critical components of it. So for myself, especially being selected in the part of the plant that was final finish, where we literally are physically moving, carrying tires two at a time. And we were building the big WDL 9s. I don't know if anybody knows them, but they're the big like Corvette tires. There's weight to them. So yes, you need to be able to have the stamina to do it. I think that's where technology also plays a role, because as we look at like Industry 4.0, as well as smart manufacturing, being able to automate some of the processes that even back then I'm like, why are we handling the tire at this stage? Why can't it be? So there's stuff like that that's being looked at. And what was the second point?
Daycare, childcare.
Yeah, so we were a 24-hour facility. We worked rapid rotations. So we were 12-hour shifts. So you're 2 days on, 2 days off, weekend on, weekend off. And daycare was very difficult. I was fortunate because I was able to facilitate that pretty easily. There was nothing offered within the facility itself. I know those were conversations that were being had before I left, because as the company was growing or our facility was growing and bigger, those type of issues were coming into play, especially as there were more women entering the manufacturing field there.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's key to have that conversation around both the education piece, but also the infrastructure, because I think,
absolutely,
it's really a lot of times the barrier will be a function of what the person themselves sees for themselves.
Yeah, if I can just jump in for a second. I think Mike and I are the only two people that have that same landline still in existence. But I just want to say that the value that I think even conversations like this are having, and the work that Grace and the team are doing on Mondays to have conversation about women in manufacturing, I think it's just it's a small piece of the puzzle. And I don't know, Grace, if you have any insight to share from the work with your Monday room and what you're hearing from industry. But I can't applaud you two enough for being here and helping just drive this dialogue and share your experiences. I think it's really powerful.
Absolutely. Well, I must preface this with saying, my experience, like as a woman, in hosting women in manufacturing, I've always been manufacturing adjacent. So I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to visit a lot of facilities, but haven't ever myself like been someone there on the shop floor. So a lot of the learnings that I've done, are thanks to your experiences, Kathy, and for other women for sharing theirs as well. But kind of going back to that education piece that you mentioned, I know you come from a family of manufacturers, so you did have kind of firsthand knowledge of what that was like. You say that, the manufacturing then was not the manufacturing we see today. So I'm curious maybe what your perception was going into this, because tying that back into education, I think today statistics show that the majority of women who come into manufacturing are often end up there by like life circumstances. So it's either because, this was the first job that was available, it had the salary that they needed. And the second, I think like the next tier down are women that go into a field, a STEM field or STEAM, specifically studying, engineering and sciences, that seek out a career. But the grand majority, end up there in just because kind of like life put them there. So I'm curious how that relates to your experience, also knowing that you come from a family full of manufacturers, and yeah, how's that played out?
Okay, so I'd say I'd be able to answer, and I can look at both views. So my mom, for instance, she worked in a tile factory for many years and was sorting very hands-on, and that was really because food on the table for kids. And my dad was in manufacturing, so it was sort of easy for her to get in. That job also had to do with the fact that she had small fingers, so they were able to, you needed women in that role to sort of facilitate what the job requirement was. For myself, again, I did say that the call of the money was one part of it. Now, what I didn't fill in first was my ex-husband was already working at the facility. And so I, through him, was able to see what they're doing. I actually got to go through the plant because they allowed spouses to go every once in a while. So I was able to see how sort of clean it was and remove myself from what I remember manufacturing being like from my parents versus what it could and can look like. So right now, what I see with kids, girls, women is, one, there's a lot more conversation going on than there ever was when I was in it. So that is the big component piece that leads us to, well, now that we're having conversations, we've got some educational tools, we've got STEM, and it opens the door up. How do you get them through that door to say, well, yes, you want to be an engineer, but how do you get them through the door saying, well, do you actually want to be a frontline worker? And I still think that technology has a huge part to play in it. When I think right now of kids, so I've got kids that span from 13 to 35. When I look at that age span of what technology means and has played a part of in their lives, I can say that the middle one, 26, as well as the younger, they depend on that technology. So if there's technology being used and it whether it's gamify or just the idea that they can continue to work the way that their life is structured right now, that's going to be a big win for them. So whether that's girls or boys, girls specifically, it still is reaching out to them. And I think we have a lot of work still to do. So hence, that's why I'm here. And that's what also drives me is if I can participate in conversations like this and I can go to events and shows and talk to people and encourage them to move that direction, then that's my little part that I get to play. And I'm happy to do it.
No, that's amazing. And I think it's also just so important, especially for, girls in particular, to have like an example, someone they can put a face to and say, oh, here's someone who has done that. They've been successful. This has been their experience. Like, how can I do that as well? So we just really appreciate you, being here and being that role model, I think, for a lot of little girls that are looking for that, or even like other women, right? It doesn't necessarily have to start super early. You can come into it at any time. I know going forward, we're doing our best. I think, something that Industry 4.0 Club is certainly interested in, especially the education piece, but, things can happen at any time. I was actually, you posted on LinkedIn last week about a newspaper article that your son found. I thought the little post-it note he put on there was super funny.
Yep.
But, one thing that you mentioned in that post is that like life doesn't follow a straight line. And I think in your introduction, it was very clear that, your life has certainly had a lot of, ups and downs and twists and turns, and things have not necessarily gone the way that you expected. But I think that's so important because I myself for a really long time have had a very linear view of how life should go. And then it like smacks you upside the head and says, nope, this is not a straight line.
Exactly.
And I think, not getting, beat down about maybe how those changes hasn't worked out compared to your expectations. Maybe that's something that just, okay, this isn't something that just women struggle with, but I think it is certainly like a big thing. So how have you kind of leveraged those changes, I think, in that career path and use them to kind of propel you forward? I know that's a very large question, so I'm happy to repeat any portion of it.
Well, the first thing I should also add to my story
Mhm.
is I have 4 boys and I have 1 daughter, and my daughter is the licensed auto mechanic that works at Porsche at Beechwood here in Ohio. So she chose a very unconventional path. She's also my type 1 diabetic. So I will say my first instinct was, what do you mean you want to work on cars? You've got this pump, she never let it stop her. She's like, this is what I really want to do. She started in nursing. She goes, I'm still taking care of people. It's just I don't have to deal directly with them. I get to work on the cars. And I
Yeah.
have such a respect for the mentality that she brought to her approach. I will say she is the first and only female automotive tech at Porsche Beechwood. And that is, I'm like, wow, there's a barrier she's breaking down. So if I helped in any little way in that, I'm so proud. I don't know if I did. So that was just a little caveat that I thought I should add. Now, I have to ask
Mhm.
you, what was your question again?
So I was, highlighting kind of like in the LinkedIn post that you posted
Linear,
last week, kind of like
the
going
linear
through just the
path.
different roles and jobs that you've had. Yeah, that kind of linear aspect, and how you've leveraged those kind of changes or sudden unexpected, detours,
Sure.
along career path.
And I think that's sort of the resilience that's built
Mhm.
into a lot of us is you don't have a choice. I was fortunate that my income in architecture wasn't dependent on my family stability. Helping my husband when he had a stroke was, my stability that I needed, and anything I can do. What I've been really excited about, and I will say we went in front of a venture person trying to get capital for our project, and I shared the story. And the reaction I got back is you really shouldn't share that part because it almost comes across that you're just there because of versus you want to be. And now I let that story out because I'm like, that's part of my the linear path, but it doesn't mean that I'm not driven by what I'm doing. It doesn't mean I actually find that it drives me more because this was a joint venture between Mike, Ryan, myself, and I did not want to see it falter, or delay if I didn't have to. And pivoting from what I was doing in architecture to here really isn't as big of a stretch as it might sound because I still get to use all the skills and all the lessons that I've learned. And I love learning. So, having a conversation today with you folks, I'm already taking stuff away that I'm going to jot, any questions people have. It's just part of who I am. So veering, and I think that maybe comes back to the women in manufacturing side. Men speak up. Everyone has their paths and they change and alter. I know for me, mom of the family, I'm going to do what I have to do and I'm going to support however I can. And this journey has taken me, as I mentioned earlier, to where I am today, talking with everybody. And Mike made a comment to me not long before we were hopping on the call, and he mentioned about a girl named Grace that's on the call. I hope she's on. And that there's somebody that's listening to see what it is that I have to say and how can that engage her to keep on the path that she's doing. And that's also what fuels me to keep these messages going and be a part of this because it's very exciting. We have a lot of work to do, but we can get it accomplished. We just need to work together and collaborate.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that leads us beautifully. I mean, we had a question kind of here in the chat from our own Industry 4.0 club, but what is behind the name Bennett? So knowing that, where this has led you today, can you tell us a little bit more about what's behind the name?
Mike?
Well, sure. So to a point that Kathy made before, and to tie in with, she talked about the company values. She talked about her personal passion, commitment to the frontline workers, commitment to smaller companies, communities, et cetera. When we were having those conversations around her dining room table, conversation was, how can we leverage advancing technologies for the benefit of those people? Right? There's all sorts of stuff that is valuable, that people are getting value out of, but it's really not reaching to the people that we want to be able to reach. And in particular, we were looking at the AI technologies and how they were accomplishing things back in 2015 that they weren't anticipated to be able to do until like 2025. So sort of the curve of what's possible was going through the roof. And so we had this idea of creating a bot, and this bot would basically be available and trained to help get you the answers that you need or make the connections to the people you need when you need it. And so like, well, what would we name this thing? And Susan Bennett is the original first voice of Siri. And so we took it as a nod to Siri and to Susan. We changed the spelling of the name so we could have IT in the name. So it's not spelled. So it comes up as a misspelled word every time I type it, no matter where I type it. But that's essentially where the name Bennett came from.
So a lot of thought behind it.
Yeah. Always fun to kind of uncover those hidden gems.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks for the question from our audience. That's great. So Kathy, earlier you mentioned education, and I know you've got a passion for small manufacturers, so we want to talk a bit about that. But maybe we could tie these two topics together: women in manufacturing and small manufacturers. If I'm a small manufacturer and I want to attract more women, certainly education is out there, but what do I need to do in my workplace to do that? How do I do that? How would I start? Can you help me think through that as a leader of a small manufacturer?
Sure. And I think, well, one, the mention that you had, which was about daycare. So thinking about it, and this is fantastic that you brought this to the forefront, because all my kids are older now. I did deal with that when I was working in manufacturing on the floor. And now it's obviously not as big of a concern for me, but for a lot of parents out there, that is something that needs to be addressed. And I'm really happy to hear a lot of larger organizations can deal with this and have either in-house daycare or they have a subsidy that can help. There's just different ways to work around it. When you're talking the small to medium manufacturers, though, I think it becomes a little bit even more challenging. Not knowing what kind of bottom line dollars we're talking about. How can they help and support? So clearly you can address the daycare itself. Personal time off, that's something that when I was going through manufacturing wasn't even on the list. You had your vacation days, there wasn't personal time off. So the fact that there is personal time off days, I think helps, so that when there is a problem, or you have a need where you need to be with your child versus at work, that companies can adapt to that, and they're helping and they encourage. They'd rather, and my thought would always be, if I can offer that type of accommodation and consideration to my employees, I'm going to have a happier employee when they come back. And sort of that ties into employee retention right now, which is a big deal we have going on, but coming back to helping. So I think being aware of what's going on with your employees is a critical part. We're all running really fast trying to get to an end goal, but at the bottom line, we're all people, and being aware of what's going on if somebody needs some help, I think is critical.
I'm wondering to those points with the way things are going nowadays with the more options for remote work or more flexibility in work and things like that, if that will be a way to help underpin some of the stuff that everybody's talking about here with the flexibility.
It's a great comment. I wanted to put up on the screen. We got another question from Karen from our audience, and she's got a question because she's with women in manufacturing, and she would like to get your thoughts on how she can amplify the voice of small manufacturers and engage non-C-suite team members in this conversation.
Well, first, let's connect and have the conversation. One of the things that, as we have conversations, we've talked about collaboration, which is really key, is sometimes when you're trying to move the pendulum forward, it's really hard if you're doing it on your own. It's a lot easier when you have other people around you helping. I'm very fortunate that I'm surrounded by very well connected people. So, Mike, my husband Ryan, we're connected to CESMII with me being on the board, and John Dyke, who is the CEO of it. We have access into manufacturing works. So sometimes it's just knowing the person that can help connect you to the next person and start to get the message out. And so I always think everything just starts with a connection between people. So connect with me. Let me see how I can help. Glad to meet you from out in Texas, I think it said.
If I could just jump in with that as well. Being a part of, like to Kathy's point, community connections, conversations, right? All these things that we're doing here are great ways to draw attention and give people a voice that they didn't have previously. There are a lot of initiatives that are underway of how to reach the small manufacturers. How do you give them a voice? And I think one of the challenges is to ask if they want a voice, right? And so there are a lot of programs that get created in a vacuum, and they end up, if you build it, they will come kind of thing doesn't really work. But if manufacturers want to have a voice, there are a lot of programs that are available nowadays. Kathy mentioned CESMII. She sits on the executive board. One of their primary focuses is how to democratize smart manufacturing. That's the technology front. That's the education. That's the community side of things. There are state level initiatives. There's probably regional lean councils or manufacturing councils and things like that people can get involved in. And while it's not a quick fix by any stretch, I think that we're starting to get to a point where if the manufacturers take an active role in engaging, that we can start to come together and leverage some of these initiatives to speak with a louder voice.
Yeah, Mike, thank you for that. I wanted to also share, Kathy, and for Karen, one thing I saw work, which is really smart, is I'm aware of one factory. What they did is they had a women's day. They did a women's open house specifically for women. And so going back to Karen's question, if you have a small manufacturer, mid-sized manufacturer in your area that's willing to open their doors and have an open house, where you get a chance to do a presentation and then take a tour of the plant, a lot of times, and then of course, go out and invite women to join you. And where do you want to send that invitation? You don't want to put it in the typical places. You want to leave the invitation at the daycare. You want to leave the invitation at places where women are. I think you'll find that may attract folks that might not have otherwise come to that factory to see it. And that's one way you can amplify the voices, is creating those opportunities for people to actually see. So just share that as an idea.
Absolutely. And then just to chime in on that point as well, I think, Kathy, something you mentioned early on, when you were at Goodyear, you were one of very few women on the team. And oftentimes, especially if we're looking at targeting women at smaller manufacturers, they might be the only one or, an only in their team. And that can be sometimes isolating. And so I feel like a lot of online communities have done a great job at bringing together a lot of really diverse perspectives. So, we have friends, kind of Mavens in Manufacturing is another online community specifically for women in manufacturing here on LinkedIn. And there's communities that are built around like these identities. So, invite Karen and everyone, tuning in to check those out as well, because if, we want to amplify voices and finding them is critical. So that's just another area where I'd encourage you to go look.
And to share as well, right? So she's with an official chapter of Women in Manufacturing in Texas. Like, okay, let's know about that. Let's know about what that group is or groups are, and get the word out. And anything we can do, I think, to Kathy's earlier point about connections and using those. If we know of something that's going on, we can help spread the word.
The other, we recently just came back, Mike and I, from the CSIA event in Denver. So the Systems Integrator Association their yearly conference. And they did that. They had a women's, luncheon where you can join and collaborate and meet and share stories. And it was wonderful because it ended up being a really working session. Like, it was a great networking. And sometimes you do want to feel like you're not sort of out there by yourself. It's great to know there's others that are dealing with same issues. And daycare did come up at that table. Just, it's a struggle now, depending on what your job is and what role. Obviously, the pandemic has certainly taught us that, virtual working from home, is doable. Obviously, in manufacturing, if you're on the factory floor, that isn't going to handle that part of it. But there are other tools and ways that we can do stuff. The other little thing I want to do is shout out to women in manufacturing, and I'm assuming that this is where the lady's comment was coming from, is even their organization has grown quite substantially over the years. I've been a part of it. I've been watching it. Hope to catch their next event that's coming up, and I think it's in 2 months. But it's groups like that also, because there are problems to be solved. And sometimes with our organizations, we need to come to them with what we think is a viable solution to the problem, not just here's the problem. We need to be able to help identify and, maybe help work it out so that they can see that, oh, this isn't as a big of a deal to, tackle and to take on. And if it helps, again, makes everybody work better, that's a win-win for everybody, for me.
Maybe you mentioned earlier, and Grace asked the question about life isn't a straight line, so to speak. And we had a question from, I think that's interesting, from Gloria. She asks, how do you balance your personal development with knowing that you may not know where your path will take you in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years?
I think you follow your heart's desire to a degree. Not that we all get to pick up and go back to school as I did. And I do look at that as, such an opportunity for me and time at life. But I think part of it is, if you look at the younger generation where they are now, and we come back to a little bit what I was saying about, workforce retention, and, we have this exodus of workers. We have people that are, coming into one industry and they're leaving, whether it's, retirement, whether if it's younger ones, it could be more money. That whatever you're doing now, do it the best you can and enjoy what you're doing and learn from it, because there is no promise as what we're going to have in 5 years or 10 years, but what you've built hopefully will sustain and carry you in the next phase of whatever your new role might be. That for me has been my example. I take everything that I've worked, my experiences, and I'll be really honest. When I left Goodyear, if I didn't see another wing foot, I was ready to move on. And now here I am re-embracing it for the last, 6, 7 years, because there was a lot of learning lessons in there. There was a lot of good stuff. Helped my family. It developed me into a better person, a more critical thinker. I learned how to troubleshoot on machines, something I may not have done, and I realized I really like doing. So I think you just take those lessons and be prepared that there's probably going to be a bend in the road, and the more equipped you are, I think you can soften that curve.
That's a great answer, Kathy. I'd like to summarize sometimes, when having worked in recruiting, you look at a resume and you look at a person's particular resume, but candidly, what I used to look for in a resume isn't their technical competence per se, although it was important for the job. It was, did they learn how to learn?
Yes.
In other words, because if you learn how to learn, then whatever path you take, you're going to adapt and you're going to grow and you're going to continue to. So this idea, and you mentioned it earlier, as one of the tenets, if you will, or values of Bennett, is this idea of continuous learning. And learning how to learn and being able to pursue that really is your best weapon, if you will, for the future, to be candid. At least that's my view.
It is. I finished my master's the day before, 2 days before I turned 50. So the idea of going back to school, did I need to go back? I was already doing what I wanted to do. No, it was, wow, there's just, what else is there to learn? And, can I fit it in? I had a supportive family that's like, yeah, go for it. And it was one of those little goals I had for myself in life. So, to be able to check that off. But everything I've done, I'm able to take with me. Sure, there's some stuff you leave behind, but for the most part, I think learning, it's what we try to instill in our kids. Be a love of learning, and you're going to be able to adapt to whatever is thrown at you.
Well, and just one little anecdote real quick, hopefully to reinforce Gloria's question or the points that Mike and Kathy have made. And Grace isn't quite as old as the rest of us, so I'll speak for us. But when I was in college, professor, we did an on-site working with a local manufacturer, trying to solve some problems. And our team had spent weeks at this company and couldn't figure out a particular problem we were trying to solve. And the professor walked in and he gave us this little snippet, and it is like just unlocked everything. And I went to him and I was like, I just can't believe that, I'm not learning enough. I'm not smart enough, whatever. And he put his head down and he pointed to the bald spot on the top of his head. And he said, I promise you, he said, when you're my age and your hairline looks like my hairline looks like, you'll have the experience to handle this. Right. And so I think to Gloria's question, right, you have people here that have been through it, that have done it. And as Kathy's talked about the twists and turns in her life and her road, that hopefully take some solace in the fact that you'll get through the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. So, stay the course, believe in yourself and believe in those around you. And we'll get through all
and enjoy the journey.
Yes. It goes quickly.
Enjoy the journey. It's, when I look at the age that I am now, and everything it's funny, it's when you put it down on paper, you're like, wow, I did. When I wrote that note that my son made the little comment on, I'm like, oh, yeah, I forgot I had a store for 4 years when I went back to school and I was moving concrete around. There's a lot to look back on and reflect on, a lot to smile about. And what drives me right now is how can I help further advance that old me 20 years ago? We've heard that comment, what would I tell my 13-year-old self or stuff? And you are looking at it through a bit of a different lens. We have more experience. Our opportunities are a little different. Our connections, that really plays a big part. And I am not a huge social media person. So my little post coming out LinkedIn, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm turning into my kids. I got to see how many people viewed and did. But what it does tell me is we have things to say. There's people that can learn from it. I'm constantly on reading what people have posted, and so I'm learning a lot more as I go. It doesn't stop. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's, constantly learning and evolving. I mean, if you can't do that, then what's the point? I think, life will get very boring. So that's certainly something. It's a great way to kind of frame that mentality. Kind of coming back to Bennett and kind of how a lot of these, experiences have really kind of set you up for, success where you are, being an entrepreneur, having experience kind of on the shop floor in manufacturing. Kind of what do you, and we actually had a comment that kind of brings me to this too. Someone's asking, are there any technologies that you're following to see how they develop in the future at Bennett?
Wow, that is a good question. And yes, we do follow other technologies. I'll say one right now that sometimes you've got your head down and you're moving forward at a speed, just trying to, we've got, people we're accountable to, right? And you need to stop and have group sessions, have these conversations to say, we have this problem we need to solve. How are we going to do it? So right now, like I'm in the depths of trying to more understand blockchain, how crypto handles it because of a component that we need within Bennett and what we're building in our Seeker Solver exchange. So, we're not wanting to reinvent the wheel. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great technologies out there. So it's important for us to sort of target and take a look. Mike, you jump in because I know you follow things different than I do. I am running the product side right now, is really where my key focus is on. So I am connecting what I need there.
Yeah, and I get to just go out and flap my gums and try to speak things into existence. It's one of the other things that's an area of tracking from our perspective is things like knowledge graphs and knowledge bases, and because you go back to that concept of a Siri-like bot trained on manufacturing, right? Like, well, how do we do that, right? How big is that problem? And we've had some conversations with some of our tech partners recently about, finding somebody or some article or some reference that can help me in the moment is a really difficult task. And so how do we do that? And we know there are a ton of resources out there. There are tons of people that are creating content, but how do I find the content, access it, consume it, et cetera? It's really, really difficult to, especially, I think one of Karen's questions was about how do you help the non C-suite type folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is in a position where they can sit in and listen to this webinar, great, right? Then they're gonna glean from it what they glean from it. But what if they can't, right? What if they're working and they need to in their spare time find a quick reference to something? So we're constantly looking about how can we crowdsource that, the definitive knowledge base in industry based off of the experiences of the people that are working, right? Those sorts of things. So those are some areas like knowledge graphs and knowledge capture sharing, those types of things that we have our eye on. And in addition to, like Kathy said, if we're going to connect people together and there's the potential for them to transact together, then certainly blockchain and sort of contract management types things we're keeping an eye on as well.
I think the other part about that to add in is it's not just having the time to consume all of it, but it's how do you find the trusted word that's out there, the trusted documents, the trusted resources, as well as we have people selling us everything. Look at cloud services, for instance, and you're putting in context. You have a lot of competitors vying for your dollar, your time, your attention to look at stuff. And you also need to weigh it against understanding what it is that they're actually offering. And are you understanding what the core element is? Data lakes, for instance, we've heard a lot about, where is everything held in the cloud? And I'll be the first to say, when my husband said the cloud, I'm like, which one do I have? And, it's very, there's just a lot out there from a technology standpoint. So, but understanding how it's actually used, how they need to, even though data exists out there, that there needs to be some, not containment, but the tag so you can use AI to get the data back the way that you want it. So it actually drives value versus just having data for the sake of data. So, that's the type of stuff that we are heavily into. We're very lucky that we also have a resource body around us that is, driving the platform that we've built and the tools that we're doing. So we have people that are more experts than just us driving that.
Yeah, and just one other point to reinforce this is that Kathy talked earlier about the notion of being uncomfortably open, right? And I think if we're really going to take on the challenge of how do we define help for every manufacturer, right? 300,000 manufacturers in the U.S. where we live in Northeast Ohio. There's almost 8,000 manufacturers, right? 94% of them are smaller than 100 people, right? So if we're going to get help to them, we're going to have to engage them, right? And a lot of that goes to against the grain of making people accessible and not wasting their time and things like that, but also people's willingness to share. And manufacturers aren't great at sharing information externally. They're not even necessarily great at sharing them internally. And so there's some practices and behaviors that we think from a technology perspective can be solved if we can get the data in a place where we can use the kind of tools that are evolving and coming at it nowadays. But again, it's going to take some changes in the standard practices of how we handle ourselves as an industry.
If I can jump in, I'm going to just move the conversation a little. All the initiatives and different things that we're talking about and how do we engage people. CESMII, along with the SME, they put out a study back in, I think it was May, and it's the I'm just going to take a look because I left it up here so I could just reference it for you guys. So it's the 2022 Smart Manufacturing Sustainability Survey, and lack of skilled talent was the leading challenge identified by 59% of the participants. The next was followed by the cost to implement, as well as the complexity of systems integration that came up at 52.49. And this is the part that also resonates, is that 3/4 of the respondents, so 77% of them, indicated that smart manufacturing industry 4.0 will increase the company's competitiveness, and the leadership understands the need for it. But then only half have indicated that they have any willingness to actually move forward on the initiative. And that's huge for me, surrounding everything that we're talking about. How do you get people engaged? How do you help the small to medium manufacturers? And it still all comes back to having these conversations. We need to start meeting the manufacturers down at the manufacturers floor level. They don't have time to get out and find out what is that they need. We need to get past how we have all these sort of catchphrases. You hear smart manufacturing, you hear industry 4.0, and sometimes it's just not resonating that it actually can be for them. But we need to actually be able to take and show them how it is. I've sat in on some sessions where we've brought manufacturers in, and you're trying to share what some of the sets and what it would be like for them. And at times it's very telling that it's like deers in the headlight. They haven't had the chance to stop to realize that there's a place for them to play in it. And I think for us to, build and grow a stronger manufacturing presence that we have in the US, we need to really engage with the small to medium manufacturers, make them stronger, and help build them up. The big guys, as far as I'm concerned, they can take care of themselves right now. They're doing good. But we have, Mike, I'm going to ask you, there's this quote that you've pulled out for me before about just in Northeast Ohio, 77,000 manufacturers, and just the disparity between.
It's the 7,700. So there's almost 8,000 manufacturers in Northeast Ohio. They account for 30% of the employment and 50% of the economic output. So when we look at that, we say, well, they're too big to fail, right? There's too much value represented there for the region for them not to survive and thrive. But when you look at them, 94% of them have fewer than 100 employees and are facing the issues that were brought up by Karen and others in the chat, right? So they're essentially too small to serve. So, and they're not too small to serve by any fault of their own. It's not that they are too small. It's that the market has failed in how it can make technology and knowledge accessible and consumable. So those are the issues that we're personally working to try to address. We're working with regional bodies, folks like CESMII and the national institutes are working to address, because it's just way too important for us not to be able to serve these companies.
And I think just, it's too small to serve. And my question immediately was like, well, who is this serving really? Because, the bulk, I think, of a lot of, I'm pulling from some statistics here, you have to double check me, but I think the majority of, folks in America are employed by small and medium-sized businesses. So it really does have a big impact. And I think, the results of that survey are surprising, but at the same time, not surprising that you shared, Kathy. I think that certainly there's a mentality and a resistance oftentimes to adopting these technologies because the risk is often greater when you are a small to medium manufacturer. So having solutions and technologies and being able to look at other people's experience to see, okay, what are some quick wins that I can get that, where are the low hanging fruits for my business that technology can provide. And I certainly see that as something that Bennett is trying to do. I think that'll really help propel forward, people's attitudes towards technology and then what the benefits are that they can gain out of those investments. So that was all just for a quick wrap up. But then also, we'd love to hear, your final advice, for our audience today and in the time that we have remaining. If you can leave with, one nugget or one takeaway that you've had from this conversation, we'll all kind of go around round robin. We'd love to start with you, and then we'll end with Mike Yost. How does that sound? Just want to say, I haven't been on mute this whole time. Okay.
No, you're fine. Did you want me to comment in it first, and then?
Sure.
I thought I heard Robin, so I was like,
oh no, I said round Robin.
Round Robin.
Round Robin.
Round robin. Gotcha. You can see I don't do this as much as I should.
All right.
So
All right, Kathy, would you like to kick it off, or Mike?
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, sure. So I guess the one nugget is be uncomfortably open. Be uncomfortably open. Engage. Reach out to us. We're happy to share. When whatever tips, connections that we can. We're all about just moving the conversation forward. What we're building at BennitAI, we're not building for ourselves. We're building it to help manufacturers solve problems, and we need all the other constituents in there helping to move that forward and being able to reach them. So connect with us, talk to each other.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy. Mike?
Yeah, so I was just going to add, so I think it's interesting. I'm going to put this up really quick because I think I want to share this question and maybe just really respond quickly. I think the most important thing you can do, I don't know, everybody's familiar with the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would like them to be done unto you. But I think what's more important to answer Gloria's question is the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they want to have done to them. And what that means is you have to ask them. And this is not just unique to women, but everybody's needs are different. And so ask them what you can do to help them and make your workplace right for them. And if you do, more often than not, you're going to find those things are not as complicated as you might have thought. So those are some closing thoughts for myself.
That's a good one.
Mike?
Yeah. I mean, I would just say, the work that's going on now that we see reflected here, right? Kathy and her willingness to lead, her willingness to be here to share. We see the work that's, the Industry 4.0 Club is doing, that Grace and her team are doing on Mondays, et cetera. And then the comments that we've had from the audience as far as the work they're doing. Like we really do have the ability, have the opportunity here to share if we're willing to do that. So it's just really encouraging to me to see people actually out here doing it. And so just encourage everybody to continue to share.
Grace, you have a last comment as well?
Yes, I really appreciate kind of one of the core values that you're mentioning of Bennett is that uncomfortable openness. And I think that's really why it's so important to have spaces like this where we can kind of understand who are folks that we can, direct our questions to, because so often, I think we're looking for, specific problems that we can fix, but I think it really comes down to building trust and open communication within your organizations, and ensuring that leadership within small manufacturing companies understand what are the challenges of their workforce, because there's a direct communication line there, and folks with management in who have a budget at their disposal can't fix what they don't know about. So just encouraging that, again, uncomfortable openness, say like, hey, these are some of the things that we're struggling with, or talk to me about what's your day-to-day like, how can we help, is really important. And I think it really just comes down to leadership. And as another thank you to Kathy, like we really appreciate you showcasing your experience and how you're pushing that into your leadership of BennitAI. I really do see it as a servant leadership, especially because it wasn't something that you really sought out. It was something that, that needed you, and you stepped up to the plate. So I do really appreciate your story and really appreciate what you're doing. So I think that would be my message, for folks in the audience, whether it's you have a leadership position or, you're someone kind of on the bottom of the pyramid, make your voices heard and ask what people need. If they want that voice, they'll speak up. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I think we kind of reached the end of our hour together. Again, a final big thank you to Kathy Calahane for her time. For her, it's we know you have a lot going on, and we appreciate you taking the hour to talk to our audience. I know they appreciate it as well. Thanks to our co-hosts Grace and Mike and for this conversation. This has been the Industry 4.0 Club. We spent the last hour really talking with Kathy about BennitAI and about women in manufacturing and small manufacturers. If you like these sorts of conversations, please join us on our other conversations we have Monday through Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And join us on our website at industry4.0.club, as well as on LinkedIn. Again, thanks to everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day.